Throughout the book of Leviticus, we've seen over and over the call of God to his people that they're to be holy. But don't misunderstand what that means. It's not about just following a bunch of rules. Through all the regulations, through the details of the sacrifices and the religious festivals, we've seen the mercy of God, God's deep desire to forgive and to reconcile, his relentless determination to live among his people as their God. And when we recognize the incredible mercy and love and grace of God that he's given, it should cause us to love him, to want to obey him, to want to give our lives to serve and worship him with all of our hearts. And then that love should overflow into the way that we treat one another, into the way that we live together as the people of God. Remember, Jesus said the whole law, including Leviticus, can be summed up in two statements. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. We see both of those very clearly as we wind up our journey through Leviticus today in chapters 25 to 27. In chapter 25, there were several provisions that the Lord makes to be certain that his people care for one another, that they don't take advantage of one another. One of those was the year of Jubilee. Every 50th year was meant to be a year of freedom and release to those who were in some kind of bondage or debt. For example, those who had lost property or who had been forced to sell property were allowed to return and take possession of their property again. Those who had been forced to sell themselves as servants in order to pay off a debt were to be set free. Another provision was that of the kinsman redeemer. If someone was poor and had no way to get money and therefore had to sell his land in order to survive, his nearest relative was to go, if he was able, and buy back the land to redeem it for his brother. The heart of all of this is summed up in a few statements. Verse 17, you shall not wrong one another. Verse 38, the Lord says that no one should take advantage of their poor brothers, because I am the Lord your God, he says, who brought you out of Egypt, and I'm the one who gave you this land in the first place. Verse 55, he says that people shouldn't mistreat anyone who's been forced to sell themselves as a servant, because he says all of the sons of Israel are my servants, whom I redeemed and brought out of Egypt for myself. In chapter 26, the Lord reminds them to take obedience to his commands very seriously, because he has loved them, because he's saved them, because he has brought them to himself as his people. He says in verses 12 and 13, I will make my dwelling among you, and my soul will not reject you. I will walk among you and be your God, and you will be my people. I am the Lord, he says, who brought you out of Egypt for this very purpose. He reminds them that if as his people they obey him, then together as his people, he'll bless them. But if they disobey him and turn away from him, there's going to be painful consequences. However, even so, he says in verse 22, if they confess their sins, then he will remember his covenant with Abraham and he'll forgive them. And then he adds on in verse 44 that he will never break his covenant with his people, because he's their God and they are his people whom he brought out of Egypt for himself. Finally, in chapter 27, he closes with some regulations about keeping vows that were made to the Lord. For example, someone would dedicate an animal or a house or something else that they owned to the Lord. And there was a great cost in not keeping your vow, a clear picture that the Lord takes the commitments that we make verbally to him very seriously. And it's not just about things in this passage like money or certain possessions. It's about something much deeper. It's about our commitment to follow him, to love him, and to give our lives to him, to serve him with our whole hearts. Ultimately, that's what he's talking about. That's what it means to obey the call to be holy. It's not about following the rules strictly, obeying the right things, and avoiding the wrong things. He's talking about a joyful presentation of everything that we have and everything that we are to the one who has loved us, to the one who has delivered us from our slavery to sin, to the one who has brought us home to himself, to the one who intends to walk among us and live in us as our God forever.